Good evening. This is a special meeting of the Princeton Planning Board. It's Thursday, September 27th, 2018, and the opening statement is as follows. Pursuant to Section 13 of the Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of the time and place of this meeting has been given by prominently posting the sunshine notice of the Princeton Planning Board. Such notice has been placed on the official bulletin board at the Princeton Municipal Complex and by transmitting a copy of the notice to the Princeton Packet, Town Topics, the Times, Comcast Systems, and by filing a copy with the Clerk of Princeton on the 11th day of September 2018. Could you call the roll, please?
Ms. Capizzoli, Mr. Cohn,
Here.
Mr. Quinn,
Here.
Mr. Stankiewicz,
Here.
Mr. Texorni, Mrs. Ullman,
Here.
Mr. Williamson, Ms. Wilson,
Here.
Mrs. Gunning,
Here.
Ms. Sachs,
Here.
Mr. Oakman. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Are there any announcements? Anyone? All right, hearing none, brings us to the hearing for this evening, which will be chaired by Vice Chairman Gail Ullman. I will recuse myself because I live within 200 feet of one of the subject properties. So let me turn the gavel over to Mrs. Ullman.
Yeah, why don't I just announce what we're doing, and then we can get on. Good evening, everyone. We are meeting tonight to review the report prepared by our consultants on the possibility of the redevelopment of the Princeton Theological Seminary properties. As you know, we were required to do this by the council. We have appointed an investigating group, and they have made a report. We'll be looking at it tonight. I do want to say initially that this is specifically what we are doing tonight. We are looking at this report to determine whether or not the properties in question meet the letter of the law. Mr. Constantine or Mr. Cosenza will explain that. And also, because it's our interest, to ascertain whether the master plan, it is consonant with the master plans. So that is the report. We all have had copies. It's been on the Princeton municipality's website for a while, so I'm assuming that everybody has had a chance to read it. We will have time for public comment, but as I point out to you and the board, this is a very specific report. We're looking at that, we're looking at the determination and whether we have questions about it, and we will then, if we approve or whatever our decision is, or whether we approve with conditions, forward it to council for action. So I will turn the meeting over to Mr. Constantine. I suppose that will be you, and Jerry will. Are you going to say something?
No, I was just going to swear in Jim. Jim, if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony? And Chris also. Do you both swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do, yes.
Yeah, okay, so sworn and affirm. Please state your full names for the record.
Yeah. Thank you. Good evening, members of the board, and good evening, members of the public. My name is Jim Constantine, Principal Planning at LRK. Chris Cosenza, also a licensed planner, is here. We've both been serving as the acting municipal planner, and we both took part in preparing this report and investigating the properties, physically going out there. So there's elements that tonight's presentation I'll make and some that Chris will make. And we wanted to just give you a quick outline. We want to talk first, sort of jump ahead a little bit. Why area need of redevelopment? So just speak quickly about the advantages of a redevelopment plan, which provides kind of a framework of what we're doing. Second, talk about the scope of this investigation, what we were supposed to look at. Then go to the statutory criteria, which gets a little bit more specific as we drill down. And we're going to just talk about those that are applicable to the properties that we looked at, in our opinion. And along the way through that, we'll look at very quickly the existing zoning and the historic district, which covers part of the properties, and get to the master plan, because the master plan, your policies really provide a lot of direction as to why we're here. But I can't start there. I've just got to hit a few of those other points first, and then we'll go into each of the properties and wrap it up with a conclusion. So on that, we are talking about using a more flexible, smart growth tool for the 10 properties that are identified here in the map up above. The blocks and lots are all identified in the report that we provided, but some of the properties front on Stockton and return on Hibben, some front on Edge Hill Street and Library Place, and another one is at the corner of Mercer and Hibben Road. It's about 10 acres in total. 10 properties.
Jim, just a housekeeping item. If you show anything that's not in your report, could you so note that, and we'll make that in the
We are
exhibit?
showing everything from the report.
Is in the report, okay.
So, yes, this
Great.
is the aerial photo of the study area. So the advantages of a redevelopment plan are primarily that it gives you greater control than conventional zoning. And it's not limited to just addressing redevelopment. And we'll talk about that charged term in a moment. Involving structures and buildings. It also can involve very specific redevelopment plan. So let me just step back for a second. We're talking about an area in need of redevelopment investigation tonight. That is the first step that's required to actually get to a redevelopment plan. So at this point, I'm jumping ahead to, if you and the council declare this an area in need of redevelopment, we can go to the redevelopment plan. So it's a much more specific planning tool, not just about things that might change with redevelopment, but things that actually can be preserved in a very targeted way. You can create parks and public space. In fact, here locally, Heinz Plaza, downtown, in fact, the only place we've used a redevelopment plan, I believe previously in Princeton, was the result of a redevelopment plan. So you can create public space as well as addressing redevelopment. It also allows to have a different type of process than conventional rezoning or zoning amendments. You can have a proactive public participation and robust participation, and in fact I know that the council indicated if we do reach that point with this, the next step, that they would want to see that. You can include non-contiguous properties, so a redevelopment area doesn't have to be completely attached to itself, and there's some logic for that, and we'll talk about that tonight as it relates to these properties. A redevelopment plan lets you do a very site-specific conceptual plan. You can go very far in terms of what you actually place into a redevelopment plan, and that's where it's different than zoning. Zoning provides this blanket set of uses and dimensional standards. A redevelopment plan might actually lay out exactly what goes where. And it gives you greater control over design, including preservation of structures and land, but also design standards. Next slide, please. And this was all covered in the one of the early chapters, 2.2, within our report. Other advantages that you can require preservation components specifically, as I indicated. You can get to very exact phasing within a redevelopment plan. You can require things be constructed within specified periods of time. These are all things that you can't do under conventional zoning. You also allows you to engage in a bit of a public-private partnering process, and a lot of redevelopment plans do have that with the property owner or developer. The municipality also gains a tool. You can designate a redeveloper, qualified redeveloper, and place certain obligations on them. You can't do that under normal zoning. Under zoning, people can own a piece of land and they can, what's affectionately called, flip it to whoever they might, including after they get an approval from your board. You can't do that in a redevelopment plan because a municipality would retain the ability to say who is a qualified redeveloper and designate them. So you control against that. So there's greater protections of community interests because you have a redevelopment agreement, and you can go into a lot of detail in that redevelopment agreement. Jerry is an expert on that. And it also opens you up to potential technical, financial tools that you don't have under normal zoning as well. So those are the highlights of the advantages of a redevelopment plan. Now, let me step back for a second. So we have this, I think sometimes people hear the term redevelopment plan. That is the statutory tool we have available in New Jersey. I think part of the challenge in New Jersey's land use law is, was really most of what we deal with today was crafted in the 1970s. It was kind of repackaged in the 80s, but it is severely out of date. When the state plan came along in the 80s and into the 90s, where it really focused on centers-based growth and redevelopment, in hindsight, I think it would have been better for the state to have sort of adopted a more creative tool, more focused on what we were trying to achieve, but others said, you know, let's just take the redevelopment statute, which was born out of urban renewal and slum clearance, and so it included things like blight designation and condemnation provisions and things. We can adapt that, and so over time the statute was changed to say you don't have to have condemnation and you don't have to have a blight declaration, and so the redevelopment tool has been a little bit of a clunky fit to try to have a more proactive smart growth tool. What a lot of other states have that I think we would have been better served with in New Jersey, and this I think originally came out of California in the 80s. I saw it a lot in the Pacific Northwest when I was working there in the 90s. Things called either a specific area plan or a sub-area plan. Generally, those are the terms that are used. It's also available. They've adopted it in Australia, in places in Canada. And basically, it's a recognition that the master plan that the municipality has is a very high-level policy document. And we'll talk about that tonight, and you'll see why this is, in fact, we believe, the ideal tool. But it's not the ideal tool when you're drilling down to the level of a district or a corridor or a neighborhood, where you have a finer-grained set of issues at play. And so to address that, the specific area plans were born to basically say that a municipality or a neighborhood association or municipality and neighborhood association, large landowner, can get together and drill down at that neighborhood corridor or district level and do a very detailed plan that replaces zoning with really custom zoning that matches a very specific plan that's done to address the real issues that are out on the ground in this neighborhood or district. And then you can put guidelines behind it, and normally there were financial tools, incentives, and things of that nature, and the sort of things that do come with the redevelopment statute in New Jersey, things I just outlined, but they were done under that basis. So we're in a stage in New Jersey where redevelopment plans are being used fairly widely, but for many folks in many communities, they hear that term redevelopment and think, you know, that just doesn't seem like it's the right fit in our neighborhood. And maybe just for context, indicate in addition to Heinz Plaza here in Princeton, a redevelopment plan was used for the former FMC campus across Route 1 where the Princeton healthcare system moved. And they also included open space, public park provisions, and environmental preservation was part of their redevelopment plan. It's been used in the Princeton Junction Transit Village in West Windsor. Jerry's been involved with that for maybe almost decades, maybe over a decade for sure. And it's been used in other communities nearby: Hopewell Borough, Hopewell Township, Montgomery, Cranberry, Robbinsville, East Windsor, Hightstown, South Brunswick, Franklin, Hillsborough, Hamilton, and Ewing. Some cases they just did area in need of redevelopment designations. Some went to the plan, and some have gone forward into implementation. So it's a kind of a first for the consolidated Princeton, but it's perhaps not quite as new if you zoom out and look around in the couple-mile radius. So we went through the advantages of the redevelopment plan. So now I want to talk about the scope of the study. So just at a very high level, what we have to do is and Chris will walk you through the details on each property, but we're going to deal with the existing physical conditions and characteristics and kind of provide an inventory of those. And then look at the potential build-out by zoning on some of the properties and how it relates to the surrounding neighborhood. We'll also look at how these existing conditions address the criteria, and we're going to make life easy because we're going to boil the 8 statutory criteria down to the 3, plus there's another one that relate to these only, and we won't talk about the others that are non-applicable. And then we'll also indicate the findings that we've come up with and propose a recommendation on that. So that's the kind of the high level of what the scope of the study is. So again, there are the properties that are involved in this study. Next, we're going to look at the existing zoning. So there are 2 zoning districts. The E4 covers 8 of the properties, as you can see indicated up there in blue. And the R1 zoning covers properties 1 and 7. Just 2 of those sit within the residential zone. And that also, just step back for 1 second, to some degree the checkerboarding of the zoning districts through this area, is one of the planning challenges that we believe affect some of the properties. And then if we overlay the historic district boundaries, you have a different line sort of running through here. And you can see that half the properties, I believe, are 6 through 10 are within the historic district. Properties 1 through 5 are without. So there's some challenges that we'll talk about in terms of that. And this is a historic category 2 historic district, so there is no buffer in this area as well. So you can start to see that obviously there are properties within this area that we're talking about that we brought into this planning area that would, could fall within a historic district buffer, but don't currently. Next, we're going to turn to the master plan. So there actually is more than a little policy direction from your master plan to look at this. And the first is a provision in the 2017 re-exam which stated that the Princeton Seminary has indicated it is evaluating options for its tenant campus on Stockton Street, and the community will need to provide input into how and if this site should be redeveloped. So, that certainly is a major policy that's suggesting why we're sitting here tonight, taking this first step in the redevelopment process. But there are some other provisions when you look in under the goals of the master plan, try to preserve the scenic qualities of Princeton's principal gateways, and where possible take steps to enhance and protect those gateways. Well, the properties that we're talking about touch on 2 gateways, one on Stockton Street and one on Mercer Street. Go back, Chris. Yeah, encourage historic preservation through land use policies which support the preservation of historic buildings and sites. As I indicated before, we have some of the properties within the historic district. As I indicated, one of the advantages of a redevelopment plan is that you can actually go beyond historic preservation, where a property owner can seek to demolish a historic structure. They need approval for that, and you can actually have a plan which very specifically preserves it, goes beyond that. So there's some real targeted ability to advance that element of the that goal of the master plan. And then last, preserve and protect the character of established neighborhoods, and that sort of leads us into a whole series of issues identified in the master plan. Chris, if we could go forward, about, we have one misspelling there. It says instructional, educational, and I should say institutional educational, and I think we had it, I apologize, misspelled in our document on page 19 as well. So the master plan states that recognizes that the functional and growth requirements of the institutions need to be balanced with the residential character of the community. And obviously, this is an area where you have this E4 line, and you have some institutional uses, and you have residential, I think almost entirely single family, sitting cheek to jowl with it. Master plan also suggests addressing major impacts in the community such as transportation, traffic, housing, development, and environmental concerns related to institutional and educational growth, and talks about, last bullet, an appropriate transition between established neighborhoods and educational and institutional uses, recognizing that frequently the mass and scale of proposed structures has presented a concern for the surrounding neighborhood, along with other impacts like traffic generated. Next. Master plan goes further and suggests that there needs to be a balance struck between an institution's need for new facilities and its impact upon a neighborhood and the entire community, and then suggests that zoning regulations should take into account the impact from the scale, bulk, mass of educational and institutional buildings to ensure that these buildings do not overwhelm neighborhoods, and also that expansion proposed into established neighborhoods be done in a manner that benefits both the community and the institution. So if you know this area, you can see how these policies and principles and that are sort of identifying issues of concern in the master plan are sort of land very much with a high level of applicability in this area. Next. So it also talks about institutions being encouraged to protect and preserve the architectural and landscape heritage and design qualities of their buildings, even when not specifically designated within established historic preservation districts. And then also that an update of the long-range plans of places, institutions like the Theological Seminary, should be looked at with regard to long-term development around their campuses, and that there should be some looking at those plans in relation to expansion before any major expansions to ensure that new development at the institutions is compatible with the surrounding neighborhoods. And then the last section we want to hit on are the gateway features. I mentioned before we touch on 2 gateways. They play an important role in the community as recognized by the master plan. The ones that we have here are ones that are characterized by residential development and historically significant structures and places, and they are certainly gateways, we believe as planners, and the master plan states this, of exceptional visual and historic significance that merit preservation, and the master plan suggests preserving both the residential character and the historical significance of these entrances. So the master plan clearly is identifying a whole range of issues that have a high level of applicability to the area that we're talking about here. So I'm going to wrap up on the statutory criteria and then turn it over to Chris to look at how this applies to each of the properties which we investigated. So the statute, and this is where we're back to this older generation redevelopment statute. So some of the language in here seems odd, but that's the tool we have in New Jersey, so I can't apologize for it. I can just say it's what we're stuck with. So the first is looking at any of 8 criteria applying to the property. So we've just indicated here the ones that we have found to be applicable. The first one is A, the generality of the buildings are substandard, unsafe, unsanitary, dilapidated, or obsolescent, or possess any of such characteristics, or so lacking in light, air, or space as to be conducive to unwholesome living or working conditions. Now, just say it on that, it sounds like it's something that deals with, urban renewal back after World War II, and in fact, that's why it was written. But as it indicates, you only need to find one criteria such as obsolescence that applies out of that. You don't need to you can unpack it from the rest of those issues. Criteria D, areas with buildings or improvements which by reason of dilapidation, obsolescence, overcrowding, faulty arrangement or design, lack of ventilation, light and sanitary facilities, excessive land coverage, deleterious land use or obsolete layout, or any combination of these or other factors are detrimental to the safety, health, morals, or welfare of the community. And so again, you'll see that we find a couple of these things, but obsolescence is certainly one that we'll find in a couple of the properties. And of course, the relating to the safety, health, morals, and welfare of the community, those are the police powers under which you have the ability to zone. So it is grounding it back into the, you know, the zoning and the planning powers of the municipality. Criteria H is the designation of the delineated areas consistent with smart growth planning principles adopted pursuant to law or regulation. We will address that. We're going to hold that to the end, and I'll pick back up after Chris goes through the property. And then lastly, there is also the Section 3 criteria, which, give me a second here because I move my pages around. Yeah, I just want to read it directly from the statute. No, it's still coming.
Is that the table on 26?
Thank you. There we go. Thank you. And Section 3 criteria states that a redevelopment area may include lands, buildings, or improvements which of themselves are not detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare, but the inclusion of which is found necessary with or without change in their condition for the effective development of the area of which they are a part. So that's commonly referred to as the Section 3 criteria. I wanted to read that for the statutory language because I wouldn't want to try to paraphrase that. Okay, so those are the criteria that you'll hear we have found apply. And I should indicate that, yes, so I'm going to turn it over to Chris now to take us through the 10 properties.
Okay, so earlier in the presentation you saw a series of maps labeled 1 through 10. I'm going to go through them in order, 1 through 10. That does not mean there's 10 properties, there's actually 9. The second and third lots labels are actually combined on one parcel. So actually we're going to go through 9 sets of analysis for the study area. So I'm going to start with number 1. This is the private recreation field at the corner of Mercer Street and Hibben Road. It's located in the residential R1 district and is not in the Mercer Hill Historic District. It's a little over 2 acres of land, and it's actually classified as vacant on the tax records. This minimally improved property is used as a private recreation field for the Princeton Theological Seminary. I'll refer to Princeton Theological Seminary as PTS for the remainder of the presentation, so just for brevity. It's used as a private recreation field for PTS. In the past, it was used for more formal, highly active event, sporting events, soccer, flag football. Over time, though, the field has gradually declined and used more casually as just a place for picnics and frisbee and flag football. So, given that the field's undersized for like a regulation size field for higher institutional use, we believe that the decline of activity exhibits characteristics of obsolescence related to the existing use of the property. In terms of zoning, what could the use become under present zoning? The property, actually the zoning itself, what I should be saying, is that also will lead to its further obsolescence as it's in relation to its current use. Current use is a attractive gateway feature, perhaps. It's green space as you go into town. The current zoning that is in place actually may contribute to its further obsolescence. The property could be subdivided as of right into 4 conforming lots, and each home could be over 5,000 square feet. And if you tighten up the lots to be exactly what you need to be and have a large corner lot, that corner lot house could be 5, 6, close to 7,000 square feet. Compare that to the properties across the street, 50-foot lots, and they're more modest in size. Additionally, the property is bounded by a 12-foot tall chain link fence, which is something that certainly does not conform to the ordinance. It is detrimental to the attempt to preserve the gateway feature as called for in a master plan. You don't seek to have 12-foot tall chain link fences and gateways. The fence is also something that is atypical in terms of the residential character of the neighborhood itself. If you walk down a street, both streets, you see attractive front yards, lush landscaping, masonry walls, and metal or wood fences, and it's a quite beautiful neighborhood. And across the street is a 12-foot tall chain link fence, which has been there for apparently 30 years and maybe longer. So we find that this fence is an incompatible streetscape element in relation to the character of the neighborhood. With those characteristics of existing zoning, decline in use, and the 12-foot tall chain link fence, we find that this combination is of the field's obsolescence and incompatible streetscape treatment is detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare of the community in accordance to criterion D. Moving on to 2 and 3, this is the Whiteley Gymnasium at the corner of Stockton Street and Hibben Road. This property is in the E4 Education District, a little under 1 acre in size. There are residential uses in R1 zone surrounding the property. It was originally constructed in 1929 and renovated last in 1982. This structure was originally part of the Hun Preparatory School until 1943 when PTS acquired the property. The Whiteley Gymnasium, given as last renovated in 1982, and through a series of pictures and our surprising findings of the interior, is not something that is typical of a modern gymnasium that you would expect in a institution of higher education. The gymnasium does not have a handicap access entry, but you could enter it if you wrap around the building, along Stockton Street, back around the apartment, and into the building only on one side of the structure. The fitness room has a handicap lift, so you could access the fitness room, but really nothing else. There's no elevator in the building. Under the gymnasium, there are office spaces and locker rooms. Under the gymnasium, not next to it. And next to the gymnasium are 2 apartments next to a gymnasium. So there's some sound attenuation issues there. Wouldn't want to be living there next to basketball games there. Several handball courts, also in the basement, have been rendered inaccessible. They're simply unusable. In fact, some rooms, some handball courts, you have to go through one to get to the other. So you just can't play a game to get to a deeper room, I would say. And some doorways are 19 inches wide. Certainly not up to code. So these existing conditions and the proximity of the apartments themselves without handicap accessibility, and they also actually share an entrance to the gymnasium. You go to the front door of either side of the apartments, and you go into a common area, and you get to go choose either the apartment or into gymnasium. It's kind of an odd, from a planning perspective, design, architectural design, that's not something that you do today. So with respect to those features and the primary concern of these properties as a gateway, and which should be promoting exceptional visual and historic significance, the certain features of the building should be enhanced and protected, and the municipalities can use the redevelopment plan to enhance the special gateway features through specialized zoning and perhaps consider historic district buffers that don't exist. So in the summary findings, we find that with the faulty arrangement and design, lack of ventilation, actually I did not touch upon the ventilation, so I'll go back to ventilation. The entire building has no AC units. In the fitness rooms, they use some fans, and but some rooms you just don't get natural ventilation because of the way of the rooms are arranged. And with that said, in a space where you have a gymnasium and you're working out with no air cooling, that's just not something that you want in a modern facility, and I think that's probably one of many reasons why it's little use to the property. So with those features, a combination of faulty arrangement, design, lack of ventilation, and obsolescence of the gymnasium, as well as faulty arrangement and design, location, configuration of the apartments attached to a gymnasium, we find this to be detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare of the inhabitants of the apartments, as well as to the community. And this is in accordance to criterion D. Additionally, the substandard and obsolescent characteristics of the apartments are conducive to unwholesome living conditions, which is criterion A. Moving on to 3, this is I believe the largest lot, tenant hall. This is at the corner of Stockton and Hibben, also in the E4 district, but not within the historic district. About 3 acres of land. This property contains a 3-story structure tenant hall, along with 3 detached residences on the lot. They each have their own qualifiers, so they sort of act like condos in a way. Together with those features, there is a surface parking lot in the rear, playground, as well as a large open space in front of Tenants Hall, which acts as a gateway feature, as well as at the rear along Hibben Road. The building I'm going to primarily focus on is Tenant Hall. It was originally constructed in 1829 as the Edge Hill School for Boys, and it was later a private residence, and then it was eventually burned down and rebuilt with only the porch feature remaining, and incorporated into the new building. It was rebuilt as the Hun Preparatory School for Boys from 1920 until 1943. There's that number again, 1943. That's when PTS purchased the property. The building is 3 stories in height, contains offices and classrooms on the first floor, and 13 apartments on the second and third floors. Tenant Hall does not have fire separation construction in the attic, which is a great concern. When one apartment catches fire, it could spread over into the other units, and we've heard that in the news over the past few years, what damage that could do. And additionally, in order for us to get access to the attic, we actually had to go inside a residential apartment to get into the attic. And we found some questionable things there, which we won't talk about. One of the other things we wanted to talk about was that, again, related to ventilation, the AC unit, only the first floor has central air. And actually it's not visible in the photo, I did not bring one, but the mechanical devices that serve basically the devices that you normally see on the exterior are actually in the front yard of the large green space. Fortunately, it's surrounded by some evergreen shrubs, but it's not a feature that you would want to see in the front yard. And this structure is actually quite large. I would estimate it was 8 to 10 feet tall, and a compound is 10 feet or more in both dimensions. The heating system is obsolete because parts are no longer made. And the heating system provides baseboard heat to Tenant Hall, but also Roberts Hall. It's on a different lot. So there's a pump that serves the heating to different buildings. So you can only imagine what happens when the heating system fails in one building. It affects those on another completely different lot. Additionally, the underground stormwater system has failed completely.
Hey, Chris, can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
We're asking that you, the folks at home, asking that you speak closer into the microphone.
Sorry about
They're
that.
having trouble hearing.
Thank you. The building and the site has an underground stormwater system, which has failed. There are various portions of the site which has poor drainage. There lacks any catch basins or any drainage that pulls it away from the site. You can see what happens when it rains in the courtyard at the rear of the building. The water pumps up into the courtyard and actually goes into the offices on the first floor, to the point where PTS has to use sandbags to prevent entry into the building. Again, the parking areas lack catch basins and inlets, and the building routinely floods because of this condition. There's also, and because of that, there's evidence of water damage in the basements near the basement windows, and we found situations where as you can see in the central photo, central row on the left side, portions of the basement walls are chipping away and starting to fail. On the third floor, the dormers lack insulation and pipes freeze for the residential units. As for the 3 residential units that surround Tenant Hall, they are generally in good condition, so no attempt was made to enter those buildings. So as a summary for Tenant Hall for this property, we found that due to a combination of faulty arrangement and design, lack of ventilation, obsolescence, Tenant Hall is detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare of both the workers as well as the occupants, as well as community in accordance with Criteria D. Also, with respect to Criteria A, the building is substandard, unsafe, and obsolescent characteristics of ground floor offices and third floor apartments are conducive to unwholesome living conditions as well as working conditions. Moving on to Roberts Hall, this is parcel number 5. This property fronts on the south side of Stockton Street, also in the educational district, but not within the historic district. The property is about a little over a half acre in size and contains a structure, Roberts Hall, which was built in 1920 as a dormitory for the Hun Preparatory School and was acquired by PTS in 1943. The building is 3 stories in height and has 28 residential apartments in 3 distinct sections of the building. And each section has their own entrance as well as their own basement. These separate sections are not interconnected through a common corridor at any floor, and this requires that a resident who wishes to use the facilities in the basement for laundry and meeting rooms, or to see another classmate or student, they are required to go outside the building, and when in case it rains, that's what happens. And when it does rain, the basement stairway has an inlet that routinely floods, so the basement floods as well. The drain, and this leads to water migration to the basement, and what we found was that of the 3 sections, we only went into 1, but we found water damage near the windows, which are now covered up with wooden structures that cover the window wells so that water damage does not further occur. Again, as we discussed with the tenant hall, there is no independent heating system. They rely on tenant hall. So with that said, the summary findings are due to a combination of faulty arrangement design, lack of ventilation, obsolescence, we find that Roberts Hall is detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare of the community in accordance to criteria D again. And with respect to criteria A, we find that the substandard and unsafe and obsolescent characteristic of the basement spaces and the apartments are conducive to unwholesome living conditions. This is parcel number 6. It's a single-family dwelling at the corner of Stockton and Edgehill Street. This home is located in the E4 zoning district. Presently contains a 2.5-story single-family dwelling. From speaking with PTS, there's no major systems failures with building. The building's in pretty decent condition. No attempt was made to go inside the building. And given the lot size and a maximum permitted FAR of 0.60 in the E4 district, in comparison, the R1 district is only 0.25. So FAR in the E4 district is more than double. So to put that in perspective, a structure of over 12,000 square feet could be built on this property. The existing structure that you see there is under 4,000. So given the maximum build-out potential of the existing zoning, which allows for a much greater floor area, we believe this contributes to the obsolescence of the existing use. Now, Jim had talked about the master plan, how it raised concerns about impacts related to the institutional and educational zoning. And one of the statements that we found in the master plan that was important in this case was that consideration needs to be given to applying zoning standards and developing transitional zones that provide for a smooth and orderly transition between institutional campus and other uses in the community. We believe that the designation of this as an area in need of redevelopment would enable the municipality to establish special transitional zoning and require preservation of the existing structure or features on the site. Given the build-out potential and permitted as-of-right zoning, we believe this contributes to the obsolescence of the existing use, which is detrimental to the welfare of the community in accordance with criteria D. Furthermore, this property could qualify as Section 3. It is adjacent to other properties which do qualify for other statutory requirements. As Jim had indicated, a redevelopment area may include lands that are not necessarily by themselves are detrimental, but we believe there is a detrimental condition due to the existing zoning requirements. Moving on to number 7, this is another single-family dwelling fronting on Edgehill Street. This property is an R1 district as well as the Mercer Hill Historic District. This property is a little under a quarter acre in size and contains a 2.5-story single-family dwelling. Again, no major system failures here, although the heating system is inefficient due to oversized piping. That in itself, we don't believe, contributes to obsolescence. And in fact, the property is undersized with respect to lot area, lot width, lot depth requirements, such that the property itself is less than half of the required lot size in R1 district. And because of that, a structure of less than 2,200 square feet would be permitted, which is less than half of what presently exists. But what you see there is actually a very attractive dwelling. And with that said, even though it does not, this property may not qualify under any criteria as indicated in the, as provided by the local housing and redevelopment law, but we do believe it qualifies under the Section 3 criteria, which again, the property itself may not have features of obsolescence or any other criteria leading to something that is detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare, but the inclusion is found necessary for features as part of a redevelopment plan, and we believe this could include preservation of the property. Number 8 is another single family. This is the last of the 3 single family properties in the study area. This property fronts on the west side of Library Place, is in the educational zone, and is within the historic district. Property contains a 2.5-story dwelling, and again, no major system failures, although we had made a comment to PTS that they should consider sanding and repainting. That by itself does not qualify as property in detrimental condition or obsolescence, but we did find, similar to the house on parcel number 6, that given a lot size and maximum FAR permitted of 0.6, a structure of almost 10,000 square feet could be built, and what you have on these property now is a structure of 5,400 square feet, not including the basement. So similar to the parcel number 6, we believe that due to the maximum build out under existing zoning, which provides for a much greater area of floor area than what presently exists, we believe this contributes to the obsolescence of the existing use. And we believe that, again, with respect to what the master plan calls for, the designation as an area in need of redevelopment would enable the municipality to establish special transitional zoning and require preservation of the existing structure. Furthermore, the property could qualify under Section 3 due to proximity to other sites that could be deemed as an area in need of redevelopment. Number 9 is Erdman Center. The Erdman Center is it's actually a through lot, fronting on both Library Place as well as Edgehill Street. Property is located entirely in the E4 educational district and is located within the Mercer Hill Historic District. The property is about 1.5 acres in size and contains a 3-story structure with a south and a north wing. The south wing was constructed in 1968 as a dormitory and last renovated in 1997. The north wing was constructed 3 years after the south wing was done in 1973, again as a dormitory, and was renovated in 1997. Adjacent to the north wing is a 1-story addition constructed in 1999, which consists of additional meeting rooms and video conference room. With respect to what the uses are in the north and south wing, it presently contains guest housing units on the 2nd and 3rd floors in the south wing, and the north wing contains additional guest housing units as well as meeting rooms. Within the north wing, original plumbing was actually installed in a cavity of the CMU block wall. What this means is that if there was a need for access, maintenance, or replacement, it would be darn near impossible and would require major reconstruction and an extreme expense. Furthermore, the juncture of the 2 wings, which built 3 years apart, come to a juncture where the floor levels are at different levels, which creates this odd space that was not, what we believe was not fully utilized. There's a lot of wasted space. In fact, some of the half levels, as I would describe it, contains storage space. which is visible to the central lobby. So there's a great degree of inefficient circulation throughout the structure. And with respect to the north wing itself, what we found surprising was that, and again, remember, this is guest housing, and it used to be dormitories, but these were constructed with Jack and Jill bathrooms. And I can only imagine the problems that happen when one user, again, these are Jack and Jill bathrooms between two users who are not related to each other. You see Jack and Jill bathrooms in a home, but maybe not in a dormitory. And what happens is the doors are locked and the other user can't get to it. So it happens, from what we could tell from PTS, it does happen, to the point where they have to put a sign on all the doors that says, please remember, when you are leaving the bathroom, unlock the doors. Additionally, the doors itself is extremely narrow. It does not comply to ADA. The clear space is only 22 to 23 inches, less than 2 feet. The one-story addition was designed to have a separate entrance to the structure. However, to maintain a single point of entry, they continue to use the existing juncture at the north and south wing, so the secondary entrance is locked at the one-story addition, so it's an ineffective use of space, waste of space. And with that combination of faulty arrangement and design and obsolescence, we found that urban hall is detrimental to the health and welfare of the community in accordance with criteria D. And the substandard and obsolescent characteristics in what we found in the north wing guest housing units are conducive to unwholesome living conditions, which is in accordance to criteria A. Last one, Adams House is also a through lot adjacent to the urban center. Fronts on both Library Place and Edgehill Street. Property contains a 2-story structure along, the repeat there, sorry. The property contains a 2-story structure along the street, Library Place, and there, at the rear of the building is a 1-story addition. Behind that addition is a pretty much unused garden space, and behind that garden space is a boxy 3-car garage which fronts on Edgehill Street. Adams House was originally constructed in 1915 as a residence and has since been converted to office space and 10 additional guest housing units on the second floor. What we found is the 1-story addition at the rear is several steps down from the original structure, and therefore is not handicap accessible. Additionally, the office space is arranged such that if you want to get into one office space, you have to go through one office space on the meeting room to get to that one office. So it's again, an inefficient use of floor space and circulation. Finally, the boxy flat roof stucco 3-car garage, we believe, is an intrusion on the neighborhood in comparison to the very attractive homes across the street, where those homes generally do not have a garage facing the street or even a attached garage at all. Meanwhile, on this property, you have a 3-car garage on the street. We believe that this combination of faulty arrangement and design, obsolescence of the rear 1-story addition on the Adams House, as well as the detached garage, are detrimental to the health and welfare of the community in accordance with criteria D. And that wraps up the investigations of the 9 properties.
So now we're going to talk about criteria H. The 8th criteria, which states that the designation of the delineated area is consistent with smart growth planning principles adopted pursuant to law or regulation. Criteria H can apply to all of the properties in this area that meet at least one of the other criteria, as Chris just indicated. So it can be applicable. So what does that mean? Well, smart growth is an approach to planning that directs growth to enhance and rebuild existing communities where infrastructure and services are available. You can support transit, reduce the number of vehicular trips, limit sprawl development, protect the environment, and reduce energy consumption. So the entirety of this study area is designated under our state plan in a Planning Area 2, PA2, as well as in a designated center, which Princeton is. So it meets the criteria as an area qualifies as a smart growth area. I can go into it in further detail, but I'm not sure. I'll just very quickly indicate, because it's really focusing down, I would say that we're looking at an in-town location, and from the state plan standpoint, within a center. So we have, within the PA2, we're trying to provide for much of the state's future development. It's trying to promote, the state plan's trying to promote growth in centers and doing it in compact forms, protecting the character of existing stable communities. We've obviously talked about how we might lead to that with this redevelopment designation, protecting natural resources, redesigning areas of sprawl, and reversing the current trend towards further sprawl, and most importantly, revitalizing cities and towns. So I think I'm not going to go into the specific objectives of the PA2, but just leave it there as an overview on the state plan. Pardon me? Yeah, yes, let's skip through these two. All of this is contained within the document in detail as sort of background. Section 3 criteria. So Chris did touch on this, how it applies to a number of different properties, but basically that a redevelopment area may include lands, buildings, or improvements which of themselves are not detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare, but the inclusion of which is found necessary with or without change in their condition for the effective development of the area that they are a part, of which they are a part. So this can be coupled with the smart growth criteria as well. And so that really leads us to our conclusion, which is contained in the report, and that this analysis shows that the designation is appropriate due to the existence of challenges mainly related to obsolescence and faulty arrangement. So overcoming these existing hindrances while taking advantage of opportunities for preservation as well as redevelopment would allow these properties to become potentially useful and valuable for contributing to and serving the public health, safety, and welfare of the surrounding area and community in general. More specifically, our analysis shows that the vacant property used as a private recreation field and two of the single-family homes feature a combination of incompatible streetscape treatment, obsolescence, or has build-out potential under the present zoning that contributes to its obsolescence, all of which are detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare of the community. Other buildings, including Whiteley Gymnasium, Tenant Hall, Roberts Hall, and the Urban Center, and a portion of as well of the detached garage on Edge Hill associated with Adams House, all have aspects of faulty arrangement and design, lack of ventilation, obsolescence that are detrimental to the health, safety, welfare of the community. In some cases are substandard, unsafe, obsolete, or otherwise conducive to unwholesome working or living conditions. So collectively, the disconnection of these properties with respect to the tenant campus, as well as from the Princeton Theological Seminary as a whole, is reflective of the evolution and latter piecemeal expansion of Princeton Theological Seminary north of Mercer Street. The designation of these properties as an area in need of redevelopment would address not only the issues found within each property, but also goes to the functional layout of the campus, which would be consistent and contribute to smart growth if you're trying to meet the goals and objectives that I just indicated relate to that, as well as the state plan. So the designation of the properties located within the study area as an area in need of redevelopment would be consistent with smart growth and policy objectives of the suburban planning area, and with the intent of centers-based development, and consistent with Princeton's designation as a regional center in the New Jersey State Development and Redevelopment Plan. And with respect to the master plan, based on the findings and analysis of the master plan that we described earlier, the designation of the study area as an area in need of redevelopment would allow Princeton to address many of the concerns identified in the master plan that would promote the purpose, goals, and objectives of the master plan. Those include recognizing that the properties within the study area are located adjacent to, but not within, the Mercer Hill Historic District. The properties are also located within 2 primary community entrances or gateways as identified in the master plan. The master plan recommends these gateways of exceptional visual and historic significance should be enhanced and protected. And designation as an area in need of redevelopment would enable the municipality to establish special gateway zoning and historic district buffer provisions and call for the preservation of specific properties beyond what's presently possible under existing zoning, thus protecting the welfare of the community. Furthermore, the master plan raises concerns about the impacts of educational zoning on an established neighborhood and states consideration needs to be given to applying zoning standards or developing transitional zones that provide for a smooth and orderly transition between the institutional campus and other uses in the community. So again, designation as an area in need of redevelopment would enable the municipality to establish special transitional zoning and require preservation of specific existing structures. And then lastly, with respect to criteria 3, we've just indicated that, as described previously, that we can include areas that are not, may not have specific lands, buildings, or improvements which are of themselves detrimental, but their inclusion could help promote elements that advance goals and objectives of the master plan and the state plan and meet the other planning objectives contained within. So for all the reasons that we've just stated, it's recommended that the planning board and the municipal council take action as necessary as described in the local redevelopment housing law to declare the properties located within the study area as a non-condemnation area in need of redevelopment. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go to the public, I'd like to see if anyone on the board has some questions. Mr. Cohen.
Yeah, first I'd like to just say I think you did a really nice comprehensive job. I only have one question, which is many fewer than I would ordinarily have. So my one question is the residences that are on the tenant hall piece of property, you did not make any reference to whether they have any historic value, and you did talk about the historic value of some of the other residential properties. So I just wanted to know if that silence was a reflection of the fact they don't have any historic value or something else.
We didn't evaluate them for that. They're outside the historic district, and certainly that could be something that is examined in a redevelopment plan. You only need one structure on the property to meet the criteria, and there's enough in tenant hall that as you saw, there's enough criteria that are met at tenant hall itself.
So no conclusion one way or the other?
This is no conclusion one way or the other, and I also believe, I'm looking at Jerry to confer, that any findings that are made about an area meeting this criteria does not provide any reliance for anybody to seek to demolish anything. That's completely a separate control that, particularly within the historic district, that you would deal with subsequently. So there's no precedent setting with making this declaration relative to preservation. Although we do believe there's properties, as we indicated, that you might want to really target for preservation with greater tools than you can just existing in a historic district.
Mr. Quinn and then Mrs. Wilson.
Thank you.
Just go from side to side.
And thank you for the report. It was good to get in the weeds on this. One thing I'm confused about was that the previous presentation, and I assume we'll hear from the seminary later, they talked about the field not being part of the redevelopment plan, and now it's in here with sort of specific what could go there. And I'm thinking that the neighbors were under the impression that this was not going to be included in the plan, or am I misremembering something that they said or that was included in the preliminary report?
Well, I can just, the reason that we included it is that this gives you the ability to preserve that as open space. Right now, it is zoned for 4 single-family homes. Chris indicated, those 4 would be probably twice as large as the homes across the street, or could be subdivided in a way that there's 1 extremely large home on one of the lots and 3 smaller ones. There's a lot of single-family activity in this municipality, so that's why we indicated that the current state of use, declined use, is recreational, and its obsolescence there, combined with this existing zoning, lends to its further obsolescence. So it was really a preservation effort in the gateway.
And just 2 other, so we could, in preserving this, require that the seminary take down the fence that is non-compliant with our, and a question about the previous use of redevelopment, specifically Heinz Plaza. That was the only other sort of project that fit under this. That they used a blighted designation for the existing surface lot, and that, have you done any research into that? I recall that it was challenged in court and obviously was upheld, since we have a great plaza and apartments and a fabulous library there. Does that sort of court case help us in case, does it preclude there being a court challenge? Does it make any court challenge by anyone saying this is not an appropriate use of the ordinance? I mean, anyone can sue for anything, but can they?
I don't think the decision in the Heinz Plaza case will really have any relevance here.
Thank you, Jerry.
Tim, actually, I believe that the property you're speaking of was included in the first time we discussed it, because I remember that Mrs. Gunning had to recuse herself because she lives across the street from it. Oh.
Thank you, and thanks for refreshing my memory about that it's in to preserve it as open space, not to build on.
Yeah, just to emphasize, what's before the board today is a determination by way of recommendation to council as to whether all of the properties or some of them meet the statutory criteria and should be determined to be an area in need of redevelopment. We're not at the redevelopment plan stage at all. So it may be that that's the preservation of that lot as open space is an appropriate use. The redevelopment plan might come up with something entirely differently.
Thank you, Jerry. Ms. Wilson?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions about tenant hall and then a question about stormwater. I think it was tenant hall where you said in order to get to the attic you had to go through an apartment, and what you saw in the attic was gross and you didn't really want to talk about it. And I'm curious if there are people living in the apartments next to the gymnasium that's used or not used, I'm not certain. Are there people occupying those? And if so, I'm curious what you did find in the attic.
Sure. The attic is only accessible via a pull-down stair that's within an apartment. So.
An apartment that's occupied?
Oh, it was occupied.
Okay. Can you talk about what was up in the attic, and if it was alarming in some way? I assume you...
We did include a picture of it. It's on the second page of photos within the document. It's a little... so there is insulation. I don't think you have it on the slides, though. No, it's, we could indicate which page it is in the report. It's just open rafters and insulation. We couldn't walk there through it, and there we did not see any fire breaks. So basically the attic runs above multiple apartments in both directions. So.
Okay, well, I'm not trying to air dirty laundry. I think that if there's a reason to notify the health department that we should. If there was evidence of vermin or bats or something that,
No.
not that I have anything against bats, love bats. Anyway, that, struck me as potentially concerning. And since it's not necessarily your job to go to the health department, I thought I would bring it up. And the question about stormwater has to do, you made a couple of references to failing underground systems. And I'm just curious, not that you need to go into a bunch of detail, but are those pipe systems that are just broken, or are they detention systems that are filled with water that's just sitting there? Do you know anything about those
Right. Well,
systems?
Based on what we observed was that there was a combination of the pipes being broken or filled with sediment to the point where the leak down spouts connect to a PVC pipe system and basically are just overlaid on land. So they don't need to use the underground stormwater system whatsoever.
Chris, could you show the photos from Roberts Hall?
So they've been disconnected.
Yes, because they no longer function.
That's
So you can
better
see,
anyway.
you can see the, go back one. You can see the overland pipes in that middle photograph. It's a white PVC pipe that's being run away. And you also see in that middle photograph, we had others in there, the basement windows are covered with wood to, again, deflect water infiltration. And the whole area back there is, the ground surface was fairly wet because of the failed condition of that. And then if we go to the other photo and show you yes, you can see the bottom photo here at Tenant Hall. That's where some of the basement offices have their windows and access from basement space out, and you can see the water just collecting there, sandbags trying to keep the water from backflowing into the building. So,
Thanks.
oh, and you asked a question about the apartments in the gymnasium, your second part of your first question.
Right, I just was wanting to clarify whether they'd been identified as apartments, but whether people were living in those apartments under an attic that was, in some way a concern or even potentially a public health threat or
The attic was in
issue
Tenant, was
that
in
we should
Tenant
notify
Hall, yeah.
the proper authorities about. That's
here.
really what I was getting at there.
No, there was not an attic that was explored at the gymnasium. That was in Tenant Hall that ran above the apartments.
Right, that, yeah.
But here,
Separate building. Yes, understood.
they share walls with the gymnasium.
Right.
So, if you like to listen to basketballs,
Got it.
And
Might
then
work.
that. Any other questions from the board at this point? Then, yes.
Yeah, I'm just going to indicate for the record that the slideshow will be Exhibit PB1. The slideshow will be PB1.
Then we will open this to members of the public who have questions about the report or comments about it. And if you'll come to the microphone and introduce yourselves. Is it required that they be sworn in for this?
Yes, they should be sworn in. Could you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth? Yes. So sworn or affirm. Could you please state your full name and spell your last name for the record?
I don't think it's on.
Joe Butler,
That's on.
B-U-T-L-E-R, 18 Hibben Road. So I live, my property abuts the empty lot, just for transparency purposes. Jim, can I ask you a question, I have a couple of process questions. Are you working on behalf of the municipality or the seminary at this point?
we're working on behalf of the municipality.
Okay, but it does seem like you're advocating for a position that the area is in need of redevelopment, or that it qualifies for an area in need of redevelopment, but it feels like your client's the seminary, not necessarily the municipality.
Our client is a municipality.
Interesting. Okay.
But Joe,
and-
Joe, if I might, I mean, their task was to do an evaluation of these properties as to whether, in their professional opinion, they met one or more of the criteria of the redevelopment law. So the fact that they found it doesn't really indicate that they're advocating anything. It's just their professional determination as to whether this qualifies as an area in need of redevelopment.
Right, but he's not an outside consultant. He's the municipal's professional at this point. So, okay, that's clear. But what role, and maybe you can answer this, does the Historic Preservation Committee and then the State Historic Preservation Committee play in the determination about this, because these are in a historic zone as they're on the Kings Highway?
Neither would really play any role with respect to a determination of whether some or all of the properties are in need of redevelopment. They certainly could play a role when it comes to the formulation of a redevelopment plan if a determination is ultimately made by the governing body that some or all of the properties meet the criteria for redevelopment.
Okay, so it can be an area in need of redevelopment, but it's not until they determine that the properties will be torn down or changed in some manner that the our own local historic preservation or the state historic preservation will be involved?
That's my view. Jim, do you have a different point of view?
Our understanding, if the municipality went into a redevelopment plan, that they would then explore how they want to employ historic preservation review. And by the way, the ball field, property 1 adjacent to you is not in the historic district.
Right. I understand that's not in the historic district. However, I do believe that it was on the former borough's property to, potentially acquire for open space should that be available to them. So it was always, I think, as part of the former borough's master plan, part of, an open space plan, should they have the money. Like, I'm trying to be fairly agnostic about this as the process goes along, even though I do live in the neighborhood. But when you say things about the interface of the educational neighborhood and the residential, the areas, I actually think that that's quite nice now in that it weaves in and out, both being we saw some lovely historic properties and also some educational buildings. And it feels as if we move into an area of redevelopment, there will be hard lines of this is a seminary property versus the neighborhood, whereas now it weaves back and forth, a little bit here, a little bit there. So that's one thing. The other thing that you mentioned was about the gateway. I guess, and the smart growth, because what's to say that every neighborhood in Princeton practically floods now. Everybody has water in their basements, just the nature of living in Princeton. So why couldn't you take that smart growth principle and overlay it on the tree streets, for example? I mean, you could use that rule everywhere in Princeton. And ultimately, I think the planning board has to think about whether or not we really want, how much density we really want in what is essentially a suburban small town. It's kind of fine when I hear them talk about it, but when you extract these rules, it feels like you're pressing a little bit as you apply these different rules. You could apply them anywhere in Princeton. Like, let's tear down the tree streets and, all the homes on the tree streets, and we could put a lot more people in there. Well, sure, that'd be a lot of smart growth. They'd be close to town. Their houses flood, I'm sure. I don't know how the lines are drawn.
Right. So maybe you packed a few different issues into that question, so let me try to go back. First of all, the redevelopment designation, if we move to a redevelopment plan, we can use that redevelopment plan for more effective open space preservation, such as the recreation field on Mercer.
That can be preserved as is. You don't need to have a redevelopment area to preserve
Jim,
that.
You don't, but it's...
If you could get that microphone right in front of you.
Sure. Yes, you don't, but it's
talking two directions, so.
Sure, it's
or you
a...
carry it back and forth with you.
it is a tool that you could use within a redevelopment plan to achieve that preservation that would not require a public expenditure, for instance, to purchase it, which is what you indicated. It was on a list with the borough previously, so.
But are we getting a guarantee of we're not, that's not happening just if you declare that area in
We
need of
can't,
redevelopment?
this is the first step that would allow you in a redevelopment plan to identify that property if it was felt that, the community felt that that was part of, a critical part of the gateway. I know my own personal perception a long time ago was I always thought somehow it was connected to Marquand Park. It's not, has a little sign there, it says private. So you could actually make that similar to the way Plainsboro created an open space park along the Millstone Creek as part of the hospital redevelopment plan, or the Princeton healthcare system plan on the former FMC campus. So you can target preservation within a redevelopment plan. That's why I said earlier, I don't know if you were here at the beginning, that we're using this statute, but it's, you know, unfortunately it's called the area in need of redevelopment, and that term connotes in many people's minds that everything would be developed. So the other question you asked about the criteria H, smart growth, could this just apply everywhere? It can't, because you can only use that criteria in combination with other of the
Well, that's why I
statutory
brought up the fact that
criteria.
all of Princeton floods. I mean, so you could take your, you know, you could take any of number of properties that have had water damage and lay on two conditions pretty quickly.
I think what we indicated earlier in terms of the advantages of redevelopment planning is that you can actually be much more specific than zoning in terms of you know, really having things be applied in a very specific way to properties. And so I would actually agree with you. I think the way that the campus sort of checkerboards into the neighborhood works well right now, but in our report, what we've identified is there is significant E4 district zoning unrealized as of right development potential that could significantly alter that relationship in a way that actually runs into the issues identified in the master plan, which is expressed a concern because you could have large institutional structures change a lot of the relationship that right now, you know, has been there for so long. So there's a sense that it'll always be there, but there is significant unrealized potential that could change the reality of what exists.
Right, that's always the threat with people who want a zoning change, but there are also some protections because those buildings are, they do fall into a historic district on the Kings Highway, correct?
Not Tenant and Roberts, there's the historic.
They don't fall?
No, they
Not
don't.
because they're not on the Kings Highway?
And I didn't, personally, I thought that they always were. I used to be on the Borough Historic Preservation Review Committee for 22 years.
I believe that the Kings Highway Historic District is just extends to the right-of-way or slightly beyond the right-of-way. It does not, it does not include all properties that abut the Kings Highway. That's just the nature of that particular historic designation.
Gosh, that surprises me because as, you know, I was the liaison to the historic preservation. It seems like we reviewed all the properties that came up that were along there, but maybe they had a different setback.
We've been covering it. I'm the current liaison to HPC, and we've been talking about it in recent meetings. So
Really?
that's my pretty clear sense of it, but we can verify.
Oh, all right. Okay. Thanks.
Yes.
Yes.
If you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Yes.
So sworn or affirm, please state your full name and spell your last name.
Okay. My name is Elizabeth Brown. You spell Brown the way you spell the color brown. I live in 8 Edgehill Street. And I have just a brief comment. I've been talking to the seminary. My chief concern is preservation of the historic buildings in the area. There are 3 Stedman houses, which you guys discussed. The seminary has assured me, and I believe them, that they intend to preserve these houses. But I was not absolutely thrilled with the report hearing that a 4,000 square foot Stedman house is an inefficient use of piece of property where you could have 12,000 square foot building. And I hope that the council and the planning board will be vigilant about these concerns.
Yeah, that finding was not a characterization regarding the Sedman House and its historic qualities and what it adds to the character of the historic district and your neighborhood. It was a analysis of the unrealized build-out potential as of right under the existing zoning that could be a threat to that structure. And I think we indicated we believe that if the municipality pursues this designation and we're to move into a redevelopment plan, that we could have absolute preservation with a greater level of control than you have currently.
And I just have one other question. I've been happy with my discussions with the current people at this seminary about their commitment to historic preservation, which I think is very sincere. But I've lived in Princeton all my life, and I've seen administrations change at both the university and at the seminary. Would the final plan which you developed for this area, would it offer long-term and permanent preservation for those Stedman houses?
It could. That would have to come out of that redevelopment plan process. So, yes.
Okay.
So you could go beyond historic preservation by very specifically identifying properties that must be preserved.
Because I know the current president is very committed to that, but the previous president was not so much. So you could draw up a plan that would protect those buildings from a possible future, maybe not so great president.
Yes, with tools that the municipality does not have today.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks.
And the same is true with open space preservation in terms of
And when I make those comments, I'm also concerned, as is the seminary, about the preservation, not of the horrible annex, but of Adams House in general. Okay.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? If so, please come up. Seeing none, I'll close the public session. And
Madam Chair, can I just make one quick
Sure.
observation apropos of Ms. Butler's remarks about the open space? That, as I think we all know, is sort of in a low-lying spot and might be a terrific asset to the town as a resiliency park. I'm just throwing that out there because it could be designed with wonderful, basically stormwater management features that absorb a giant amount of stormwater runoff, but are also beautiful, publicly accessible, all of that stuff, which is something that's happening in other parts of the world, not so much in New Jersey, but we could be a leader in that regard, I think.
are there any other comments? Well, I'll just go back to what our instructions were from the council who referred this to us. We were directed to conduct a preliminary investigation of the study area as they were defined. I think we said we've done that. The purpose is to determine whether the study area constitutes a non-condemnation area in need of redevelopment. More specifically, the planning board, I'm quoting, is directed to prepare a map showing the boundaries of the proposed redevelopment area and locations of the various parcels of property included therein with a statement setting forth the basis for the investigation appended to the map, et cetera, et cetera. So,
Could I make a motion?
and Jerry reminds me that the ultimate determination is to recommend to the council that the study area, as it's been defined, or any part of it, should be determined or not determined to be a non-condemnation area in need of redevelopment, and any other additional comments that we may want to make.
I would move that the board recommend to council that the designated study area should be considered an area in need of redevelopment,
Thank you.
non-condemnation.
Moved by Mr. Cohen, second.
I'll second that.
By Mr. Stankiewicz, seconded. Do you want to call the roll, please, Ms. Catronio?
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn?
Yes.
Mr. Stankiewicz?
Yes.
Mrs. Ullman?
Yes.
Mrs. Wilson?
Yes.
Ms. Sacks?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Jim and Chris for preparing a report that took, at least from my point of view, a pretty complicated topic, and presented, I thought, with great clarity. I think we know what the next steps will have to be by council, and eventually probably the planning board will be participating. But the great thing about this program is that it simply demands that the public be involved at each step. And so I think that's an important aspect of this entire process. And I thank you all for coming tonight.
Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. A second?
Second.
In favor?
Aye.
Aye.